want to move to, we've been in the past and I want to move to the future, which is a Thrutopia, which is, utopia is always produced by someone else's dystopia, that both function, create the other. And so I think the Thrutopia is that collaboration. It's less about a climactic state, and it's more about a participatory event that people are constantly working on. And so I want you to talk about how you envision Thrutopia, what kind of work can be produced by it, how it comes to be.
Brilliant question. So yes, and I just want to say I hadn't heard before that dystopia creating utopia and vice versa. I love that. And this is a participatory event. That's the thing. It has to be. So if we come from my really basic concept that no problem is solved from the mindset that created it, I didn't make that up, but it's one of my founding concepts for this. And we need to start exactly where we are. And we need to unpick what's really not working. So for me, what's really not working is governance structures, economic models, and estimations of value and worth. And then how could we change those absent violent revolution? I'm absolutely clear that this needs to be peaceful. So then what can we do? And what I have discovered, partly, I wouldn't have been able to write the Thrutopian book if I hadn't been running the podcast. There are so many people right at the leading edge of change. There are so many theories of how we can do this. There's so many social technologies being evolved and tested in real time of how can we help people to respond differently at the same time as our social media technologies, by default or design, are driving us into more and more dopamine-based outgroups. Our tribalism is now at the point where it is threatening the foundations of our democracy. How do we change that? And how do we bring people together to find a common vision, even to accept that there might be a common vision? And then what does that common vision look like? And accepting the fact that those who gain most from the status quo are not going to relinquish their power readily. So I want to change the governance system. I think our current system of so-called democracy is not democratic and is not fit for purpose, probably hasn't been fit for purpose for a long time, but it's medieval. A main problem now is we've got Paleolithic emotions, medieval technologies, medieval institutions are the technologies of gods, and this is not a winning combination. So we need how do we get out of our Paleolithic emotions? How do we get out of a world that is feeding us constant dopamine hits and into a world that creates serotonin mesh, as in neural mesh and social mesh, which is more long lasting? The problem with dopamine hits is that they're short term, they're linear, they end, and we keep trying to refeed them, and you never get the same hit you got the first time. Whereas a serotonin network mesh in our brain is self-supporting and grows and evolves and becomes stronger. So how do we move people? But the dopamine hits are still very addictive. That's what dopamine is. And when I was doing the thesis at Schumacher, I read somewhere someone did some paper, and the validation that we get when our guy, so let's say, suppose Boris Johnson had decided to run for the Tory leadership, his followers were getting huge dopamine hits from his return, our guy is right, equivalent to a line of cocaine. And if he'd run and won, they would have got big lines of cocaine. And then you want that more, and you'll do whatever it takes to get it. The ends always justify the means. And this is, it would break us apart, but they wouldn't care because they were right and they're getting the dopamine hit. It's a very, very big reinforcer. So how do we shift people onto the very different reinforcement of connection and coherence and generosity and integration and all of the things that give us the serotonin hits that aren't as steep but are much more long lasting and resilient? So really the research for that has been a lot of really quite deep research of what are people evolving as alternative governance and political models, and how do we make the transition from one to the other without having tanks on the streets? And then from that, what economic model could we use that isn't predicated on a predatory capitalist growth model, which is infinitely extractive and is not compatible with a living planet? So that all sounds a bit theoretical. I've got 181,000 words of how I think it works, but I only got us to the end of the first day after the general election that breaks everything apart in that 181,000 words. Book 2 is going to have to be, that was the building the movement to show that with the right movement we can create difference. And then I haven't started yet the next book, which will be, okay, this is the difference we can make. But as the old structure crumbles, there's going to be friction. There is going to be friction. But I think, I can't remember who it was, but there is some kind of famous aphorism about the old is falling apart, the new cannot yet arise, and that in the gap between is all possibility. But if we don't, I think if we don't create visions of that possibility, we don't create visions of a future that we could imagine our grandchildren's grandchildren looking back on our time and going, yeah, they left it way too late. They were led by complete madmen in totally the wrong direction, but when it mattered, they turned around and they made good decisions for the benefit of everybody, not just their own tribe. And we are here because of them, and we are grateful. And I want that. I don't have grandchildren, but I want my partner's grandchildren's grandchildren to say that, not they fucked up so badly that we're living in deserts.
This seems to come back to your evidence-based storytelling and spirituality, which is, it's not just about the creative act, it's about what does it actually do? How does it operate in the world? How does it create actual change? Storytelling that doesn't actually change the way people relate to each other and to their earth, for me, it's not urgent enough. The times are urgent. And another thing about your podcast, about Thrutopia, that I think is a really great model is you draw on different modalities. Like it's an ecology of practices. You're not going to look to just one person, because we can't have a monotheistic mindset about how this is going to happen.